History is full of what-ifs. What if the Saxons had won at Hastings? What if Julius Caesar had lived to fight another day? What if Gavrilo Princip's pistol had jammed in Sarajevo? But here's another one to chew on. What if Britain had fought in the Vietnam War? Let's rewind the tape. After World War II, the French tried to reassert control over their colony of Indochina. That didn't go well. Vietnamese independence movements, led by the communists under Ho Chi Minh, fought them to a standstill. In 1954, after the crushing French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, Vietnam was split in two, Communist North, Capitalist South. Cue the Cold War tensions. In our timeline, the United States gradually took over from the French, first with advisors, then boots on the ground. By 1965, it was a full-blown war. Over 8 brutal years, the U.S. deployed millions of troops, dropped millions of tons of bombs, but eventually pulled out in 1973. The North Vietnamese conquered the South in 1975. But what if, just what if, the United Kingdom had taken the lead instead of the United States? Let's set the stage. The year is 1965. The U.S. is sitting this one out. But across the Atlantic, Downing Street is getting nervous. Communism is spreading through Southeast Asia like wildfire. The British government decides it can't stand by, and the Union Jack is raised over another foreign battlefield. There is, believe it or not, some historical precedent for this. Between 1948 and 1960, Britain waged a successful counterinsurgency during the Malayan Emergency. There, British and Commonwealth forces fought the Malayan National Liberation Army, a communist guerrilla movement, using a very different style of warfare than what America later employed in Vietnam. Rather than flooding the jungle with napalm and raw manpower, Britain opted for precision, intelligence, targeted operations, and crucially, efforts to win over the civilian population. It was more scalpel than sledgehammer. Let's compare scale first. In Vietnam, the U.S. committed about 2.7 million soldiers over the course of the war. Britain, far smaller population, far smaller military. During the Malayan Emergency, around 40,000 British and Commonwealth troops were deployed at the height of the conflict. The rest of the 450,000-strong anti-communist forces were made up of locals, police, and indigenous militias. In this alternate Vietnam, we'd likely see a similar coalition. British regulars, Australian and New Zealander troops, and of course the ever-reliable Gurkhas. The King's African Rifles would be out of the picture. They were disbanded in the 60s. Still, even with Commonwealth backing, the numbers wouldn't come close to America's massive commitment. And that would change everything. The American strategy focused heavily on body count. In a war without front lines, success was measured by how many enemy combatants were killed. That led to a brutal war of attrition, with massive airstrikes and artillery barrages flattening villages and jungles alike. The U.S. dropped more bombs on North Vietnam than it had on Nazi Germany. In some cases, entire squadrons of B-52s were dispatched just to eliminate a single enemy gun position. Shock and awe? Well, more like shock and crater. Britain simply wouldn't have that firepower or that approach. Drawing from their Malayan experience, the British would likely have pursued a limited counterinsurgency campaign. This would mean focusing on intelligence, community relations, and targeted strikes rather than overwhelming force. Back in Malaya, one of the boldest moves employed by the Brits was the resettlement of hundreds of thousands of ethnic Chinese villagers. These communities had been the main recruitment pool for the communist insurgents, so the British moved them into guarded villages with barbed wire fences, watchtowers, and round-the-clock patrols. It wasn't exactly gentle. Families were forced to leave homes and possessions behind, many of which were burned to deny the enemy supplies. But in exchange, these resettlement camps offered something rare: running water, electricity, schools, and access to medical care. It was a calculated move: cut off the rebels from their support base and win the hearts and minds of the civilians. And it mostly worked. In this Vietnam scenario, the British would try something similar, though with major differences. In Vietnam, the Viet Cong recruited from all parts of society, not just an ethnic minority. So mass resettlement would be more complicated, less effective, and potentially even more controversial. Still, the core idea would remain: isolate the guerrillas, secure the population, and pacify one region at a time, rolling up the map from bottom to top, as one British officer famously put it. Combat would also look different. Instead of vast sweeps by helicopters and tanks, British forces would rely on small, mobile units guided by local intelligence. Think SAS teams slipping through the jungle, not B-52s leveling it. Surgical strikes, not scorched earth. Meanwhile, law enforcement would maintain order in civilian areas. Police, special constables, and local militias would handle day-to-day security, allowing the military to focus on strategic operations. This division of responsibilities, military versus civil, was something that the US had struggled with. And what about manpower? The US turned to the draft, calling up over 2 million men, fueling anti-war protests and cultural upheaval. Britain had national service too, but it had ended in 1960. In this scenario, it's unlikely it would have been reinstated, so the war effort would rely on volunteers and professional troops. This limited manpower would cap the scale of Britain's involvement, but it might also keep domestic dissent in check. There'd be no Woodstock, no draft card burnings, no full-blown counterculture, just a slow burn discontent that could simmer in Parliament and sway elections. So, would Britain have done better? Possibly. Militarily, the British approach could have led to fewer atrocities, less destruction, and a more stable civilian population. Politically, the war might have been less explosive at home. But ultimately, it is hard to imagine a different outcome. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army weren't just guerrillas hiding in the jungle, they were a deeply committed force backed by a powerful state. Without total war and a massive escalation, even the best counterinsurgency tactics might not have stopped them. In the end, like the Americans, the British might have found themselves in a war where tactical victories meant little and where the enemy just had to wait them out. Prime Minister Harold Wilson, facing mounting costs, growing opposition, and a stagnant economy, would eventually be forced to withdraw, perhaps a few years earlier, perhaps with fewer headlines. But the end game would be the same. Saigon would fall, the North would win, and the South would vanish. The Vietnam War, fought by Britain, would be a leaner, quieter war, but one that ends the same way. Less napalm, less noise, same result. This is, of course, all hypothetical. But now it's your turn. How do you think the British would have handled the Vietnam War? Would they have held the line or quietly bowed out like everyone else? Imagine opening a box and finding a metal paperclip that remembers its shape, bricks made from the world's most important metals, and games that twist your brain in 6 different directions. Every 3 months, the Curiosity Box delivers a hand-picked collection of science toys, illusions, and books designed to spark wonder and critical thinking. You'll also get illusion stickers, a brain-bending shirt, and a hardcover book called What is Color, diving deep into one of science's most overlooked mysteries. Each item comes with exclusive video lessons from Michael of Vsauce, content you won't find anywhere else. Click the link now and get 25% off your first box by using our promo code, Simple History. Let your curiosity take over.